You're now watching Way Back Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
To last week's show a little bit and following up on a few things from last week's show. Going to talk about some old buildings, talk about some old businesses, some old homes, and some old history in general. So as always, 407-1111 is the number. Feel free to give us a call and share with us your memories and your thoughts on the topics tonight. We've got, I think, an interesting kind of selection of pictures tonight. You know, if you remember from last week's show, we were trying to identify the oldest building in Rocky Mount. And it was kind of a toss-up between the old, what we used to call the old Lewis home, now known as Stonewall, and the Thomas Battle home there by Rocky Mount Mills. And of course, the Rocky Mount Mills itself dates back to the part of the original building anyway, dates back to 1871. The original Rocky Mount Mills building, of course, burned twice, once in 1863 and again in 1869. But the oldest part of the mill that's still standing today dates back to 1871, if you recall. So anyway, along that train of thought, I went looking after last week's show to see what else I could find in that old time frame. And I stumbled across a really interesting piece of information that I had seen before, but frankly, I had forgotten about it. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But before we get into that, there was a couple of things we didn't get to last week that were tail end of the show. We ran out of time, actually. So without further ado, let's go ahead, Lee, and jump into picture number one. This is just an old ad that appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram September the 24th of 1917, and it's an advertisement for a tobacco warehouse that I had never heard of before. Maybe some of you remember hearing about it. I don't think anybody alive today remembers it because it was in operation from 1894 to 1925. So I dare say we don't have anybody alive today who remembers this. But in any case, number one is a ad for the Cooper's Warehouse. So Lee, we can get that on the screen for our viewers. Bear with just a minute here. We'll get things in order back in the control room there. But Rocky Mount has been known for tobacco warehouses since the 1800s, of course. And there have been many over the years. Some are still with us, of course, but most are not. There you go. This is the ad for the Cooper's Warehouse, and the address was 339 North Church Street. Now, there's nothing there now. This is kind of categories across the street from the Imperial Tobacco old building there, and which is now, of course, the Imperial Center. But this warehouse was in operation from 1894 to roughly 1925. It was torn down sometime after that. I'm not sure that there wasn't maybe someone else took the warehouse over before it was torn down entirely. But in any case, this is one that I did not know anything about until I stumbled across it. So I meant to share this last week's show, and of course we ran out of time, so we didn't get a chance to. But I just thought it was interesting. In 1917, when this ad appeared, you see they had been in business at that time 23 years at the same location. And best I could tell, I went through my old city directories, and the last reference I could find in anything for this business was in 1925. So either they sold out or they went out of business or someone else bought them out or whatever, I'm not sure. But anyway, they were out of business by 1925, at least out of business as operating as Cooper's Warehouse. So another picture we didn't get to last week that really I had hoped we would, because it really fit and kind of dovetailed good with what we were talking about last week, because it is one of the oldest buildings in Rocky Mount, and sadly it's just about to fall in now. The shell of it is still standing. Lee, number two, if you would. Many of you know this building as the Pearsall Machine Works building. The pictures you're seeing here I actually found in this online historical registry that I'll get to a little bit later on. But these are the best two pictures I have seen of that building. And of course, it was before it was Pearsall Machine Works. It was a couple other businesses, machine businesses. But originally, it was a Rocky Mount power plant. And so this building itself dates back, oh golly, to 1902. And it was originally a one-story building, and the second floor was added onto it. It was also remodeled a couple times inside to accommodate not only the power plant in operation, but also the machine works that were in operation here later on. And so, like I say, these pictures here are of a time frame when it was still operating as a machine shop. Probably, I'm going to guess, in the 1970s, maybe as late as 1980. Pearsall had it in operation up until about 1994 or 95, I think it was. And there's been nothing in it since that I could find anyway. I think once Pearsall shut down, it was vacant for a while. And then it just never did have anybody else occupy it. Number 3, if we could, Lee. And this is the most recent picture that depicts it when it was still a usable building. And I think this dates to about 1980, 85, somewhere along in there. And it's in horrible shape now. I rode by it a couple days ago. In fact, the roof is all falling in now. This building is on the National Historic Registry. Because of its significance historically, certainly. And it's a shame that they can't do something with this building. To say it's got good bones, I think would have been pertinent and probably applicable a few years ago. Now, I'm not so sure it's even got any bones left. Like I say, the 4 walls are still standing, but the roof is gone, and it's in horrible shape. And it's just a shame that this old building can't be reinvigorated, redone, remodeled somehow to be put to some kind of use. Be a great place for a museum, but that's neither here nor there. But while I was looking for information about the power plant, I ran across some really neat articles and ran across, we'll share some of those with you in a few moments. But I also ran across a couple of ads that were interesting to me because as far back as 1919, there were power plants being sold for home use. In other words, you could buy an electrical generating plant to provide lights for your home or your business or your farm. They were particularly targeting farmers who would need electrical power to power any number of things around the farm. And so the first one I found, I'll leave number 4 if you would. This ad appeared January 23rd, 1919 in the Rocky Mount Telegram. And you see its company's called Delco Light, the complete electric and power plant. It says the safest, surest, and most economical form of light and power. And it looks like this is a terrible picture, but it looks to me like it works in conjunction with a battery bank there. And so the generator generates electricity, it's stored in the batteries, and then as the electricity is needed, it's pulled from the batteries, would be my guess. But I just thought it was interesting that over 100 years ago, you could buy a home generator. Now you can go to Lowe's and pick up one for a few $100 or so. But in 1919, they were making electric generator plants available to the public for sale. And in fact, number 5, Lee, in 1919 also, this ad appeared September of 1919, this company called Silent Alamo, I did a little research on these folks, they built a home/light-duty electric power plant, and they specifically targeted farmers as well. And they had a rep over in Nashville. J.W. Cockrell over in Nashville was a rep for the Silent Alamo. And again, I saw a few other ads for this little power plant, and it looked to be a generator basically that worked in conjunction with a bank of batteries to store electricity as it generated. The one thing I couldn't figure out, this ad for this particular device here made a strong case for the fact that it was silent. You see the name, Silent Alamo. They stressed that it was vibration free, that it didn't make hardly any noise, and that it would run. They even had one display where it was sitting on 3 or 4 glasses, table glasses, drinking glasses, and running supposedly. Now, of course, this was just a drawing or photograph, so I'm not sure how accurate that was. But what I couldn't figure out was, okay, if this thing is a generator, surely it wouldn't be a gasoline motor. They certainly had hit or miss engines back in the early 1900s, and so that would have been a possibility to power a power plant. but those things were certainly not vibration free, and they weren't quiet by any means. So I'm not exactly sure. I didn't see anything that looked like a boiler, so I don't think they were steam powered. But there are a few of these things out and about. I saw on eBay, for example, a couple of people that advertised them had them. So it might be something a little more to dig into there, because to me it's just interesting that there were these types of generator and power plants available back in the early 1900s. Okay, so to switch gears just for a minute and go back, I ran across an article, a little short blip. If you may recall, there was a column in the Rocky Mount Telegram several years ago called Open Line. And you could call into the Telegram and ask a question, and they would try to find you an answer, and they would post it in the paper under the Open Line column there. And so in 1968, somebody called in and said, who operated the Rocky Mount Iron Works? What period was it there, and where was it located? And so Rocky Mount Telegram did their research, of course, and came back with an answer. And Lee, if you would put up number 6 for our viewers. The answer here, it says, you're probably referring to the Rocky Mount Machine Works. It was organized in 1903 and was first located on Washington Street, where Dillon Supply Company is now. The originators were 3 brothers, S.F., T.E., and T.P. Jenkins, and L.F. Pearsall. In 1912, the partnership was dissolved, and the business was bought out by John Daughtry and S.F. Jenkins. It then moved to 217 Andrews Street, where the old city power plant was located. In 1944, Pearsall bought out Daughtry and changed the name to Jenkins and Pearsall Machine Works. Harry Pearsall, in 1965, bought out the interest of S.F. Jenkins when Jenkins died and changed the name to Pearsall Machine Works. So there's kind of an overview of the ownership of the building and the business, particularly once it was located to 217 Andrew Street, where the original power plant was in Rocky Mount. And so I can't remember anything as far as the name of the business prior to the Pearsall machinery, because of course by 1944 when 1965 when Pearsall bought out his other partner, from that moment on it was known as Pearsall Machine Works, and that was my earliest recollection of it as being Pearsall Machine Works. But I thought it was interesting that there were several partners over the years involved in that business. And so I did a little research to find out just what was going on with the Pearsall Machine Works and the previous owners and so forth. And so I come across several different advertisements, and I thought I would just pull a few of them and share with you tonight. Number 7, Lee, the Rocky Mount Telegram had this ad February the 29th of 1944, and you see it says, important announcement to the people of Rocky Mount. It is with pleasure that we announce that Mr. Harry Pearsall has purchased a 1/2 interest in Jenkins and Daughtry Machine Works. And so hereafter, the style of the firm will be Jenkins Pearsall Machine Works. And this kind of jives back with what we were talking about earlier, where it said the old city, in 1944, Pearsall bought out Daughtry and changed the name to Jenkins and Pearsall Machine Works. So, again, this is 1944. And you see they did all kind of welding, machining work. They had a foundry there, did industrial and farm repairs. They worked with aluminum, brass, iron castings. It was a well-rounded business, and they catered primarily to farmers and industrial customers, particularly those who had a need for fabricated metalwork. Okay, so let's move on to number 8. December 10th, 1945, just a year later, they announced they were opening a foundry department here. It says, we have felt for a long time the need of this department in Rocky Mount and Eastern North Carolina, and we have finally succeeded in getting sufficient skilled help to take care of the needs of this area. We will have our opening run on or about December 15th. This department will specialize in individual job work castings of any design, and we will carry in stock building material and municipal castings. We will also make job work castings of bronze and aluminum. Please consider this a personal invitation to visit our foundry department and see how well we are prepared to serve your needs. Jenkins and Pearsall Machine Works. Okay. So, in addition to doing work for a commercial business industry and farming applications, they also got into doing work for the homeowner. By 1958, item number 9, Lee, the Rocky Mount Telegram ran this ad where they were advertising they made wrought iron and distinctive ornamental ironwork. And you see there, that's supposed to be an illustration of wrought iron work around a porch, I guess, and steps coming down from the porch. But again, this was May the 6th of 1958. It says, "Welcome to Rocky Mount's Better Living Exposition. See the distinctive ornamental ironwork on display in booth number 15 and 16. For a while, for many years in fact, Rocky Mount had a Better Living Expo every year. And local businesses would participate in it. They would show off their handiwork, their craftsmanship, their products, their services. And it went on for several years, and then it kind of went by the wayside, and they stopped having the expo. It was kind of revitalized several years ago for a while, and it didn't last but a few years, and it kind of fizzled out again. But it was kind of neat that these expos went on for many years and were a really good way for businesses to advertise their products and services and their people and what they could do. So let's move on to lead number 10. March of 1986, this ad appeared for Pearsall Machine Works, and of course by this time it was indeed just Pearsall. Mr. Pearsall had bought out his previous partner in 1965, and so when Harry Pearsall bought his partner, Mr. Jenkins, out, it became Pearsall Machine Works. I'm not sure who this gentleman is. It could be Mr. Pearsall, actually. I don't know. He's not identified in the picture. I did not know him personally, so maybe someone did and could recognize him. If you think that's him, if you know for sure that's him, give us a call, 407-1111. Like I said, this gentleman is not identified in the picture, but this was the first ad I found where it was advertised as Pearsall Machine Works. And again, this is 1986. So for a better part of 10 years, Pearsall Machine Works was a very busy machine shop in Rocky Mount. They were not the only one, by the way. Some of you may remember the Auto Equip had a machine shop over on, was it Bassett Street over there, across the railroad tracks off of Church Street. But in any case, all the good things had to come to an end. And sadly, by June of 1996, Pearsall Machine Works was out of business, and this ad appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram advertising an auction. Pearsall Machine Works Incorporated, established in 1902. It says a list of everything they're selling: lathes, mills, machinery, tooling, including pickup trucks and other types of equipment. This was an auction that I would have loved to have gone to. I don't remember hearing about it, frankly, in 1996. But there's some neat stuff here, and it's just a shame that a business that had been in operation for literally 94 years ceased to be in existence. And I don't know what happened. As far as I know, Mr. Pearsall's health was still good by 1996, but I don't know that for sure. He could have had some health issues that led him to make a decision to close the business up. But in any case, by 1996, the business was out of business, and there was no more Pearsall Machine Works. In 2009, August 7th, in fact, of 2009, there was an obituary, number 12, there you go, Lee, for Harry Smallbones Pearsall Jr. I don't think I've ever heard of that. No, we got a caller. Let's get the call. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Randy, that is Harry Smallbones Pearsall is exactly right. He was in my class about 1948, 47, 49, maybe 50. His sister, one of his sisters married Bob White, the dentist here in Rocky Mount, and the other sister, I do not know, Mary Etta was her name. But Harry ran it. His daddy had it first, and when he got out of school, maybe went to college. I don't know. But then he ran that place for a while.
So how did they get the Smallbones? Is that a family name? You ever heard any story about that?
I have often wondered. We, of course, jokingly, all through grammar school and high school, we called her Smallbones just for the heck of it.
Right.
No idea. We always wondered.
Well, that was my first time.
You kind of pick on somebody, Smallbones, and I have no idea.
I'm sure he got picked on a lot with a nickname like that.
I'm sure that. I went to school with him for a long time, and we were classmates for quite a while. I have no idea whether he's living or dead or what, nor do I know his sisters. But there were two sisters and Harry.
Okay, buddy. All right, thanks for calling in.
Very good. Talk to you. Right back.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye. Okay. That brings us to our first commercial break. So when we come back from the break, There was a really neat story in the Rocky Mount Telegram in 2003 that the late great Steve Raper wrote. And so when we come back from the break, I'll share that with you. Steve was a local historian himself and was very knowledgeable about Rocky Mount history, and did a really nice write-up in the Telegram about the history of Rocky Mount's power plants. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more Way Back Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
Okay, if you're just tuning in, you're watching Way Back Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcox. We're talking about, the old power plant over on Andrew Street, which later years became Pearsall Machine Works. As I said before the break, Steve Raper, himself a very knowledgeable, very qualified historian, local historian, did a lot of research on Rocky Mount and the history of businesses and industries around the area. And in 2003, he did a really nice write-up about power in general. In fact, there was a book that came out. I've got a copy of this book. It was called 100 Years of Power in Rocky Mount or something like that. And it traces the evolution of power generation in Rocky Mount. There's also the gas industry in Rocky Mount, natural gas and so forth, and water, sewage and so forth. And so anyway, Steve wrote this little overview. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's kind of long. If you want to follow along, you can put it number 13 for our viewers. This came out January the 26th of 2003. And let me back up before I start reading here. Back in, I think it was around 1875 or 1880, the state of North Carolina made available to municipalities that wanted to do so the option to sell bonds to raise money to build and purchase and pay for power plants and sewer systems and all kinds of municipalities. And so it took a little while for Rocky Mount to get on the bandwagon, but they did. It said water came first at Rocky Mount, then light, and then sewage treatment. The century was young and with promise, and the community was determined that it would be in step with the times. The origins of Rocky Mount's publicly owned water systems are somewhat obscure, but in August of 1899, the town acquired 8 acres of land for construction of a pumping station just over a mile west of the town limits on what is now known as Country Club Drive. Located at Bunn's Hole on Stony Creek, the water plant built on that land still stands and today is the site of the Rocky Mount Moose Lodge. The first sewage system, built in 1901, was primarily a collection system. There was no treatment and lines simply discharged directly into the Tar River. Effective public sanitary initiatives would later require Rocky Mount to treat its own wastewater to reduce contamination of the Tar River, and the first treatment plant was constructed in 1910-1911 on the Tar River. The first electric light plant was located at 217 Andrew Street. The building also still stands and is known as the Pearsall Building. The switch to municipally owned electric service occurred on January the 1st of 1902, and it was a source of great pride to the citizens of Rocky Mount. The city's first manufactured gas plant, located on Albemarle Avenue at the current location of the city's fleet maintenance facilities, was constructed in 1914. The vision of the town's Board of Commissioners between 1900 and 1920 has paid dividends ever since. So we've talked in the past about how Rocky Mount came to get these power systems in place. And of course, after this plant was sold to the machine shop operating here on Andrews Street, the new power plant over on Tar River was opened up around 1915, I think it was. And it ran there for a number of years. And so over the years, Rocky Mountain has increased capability. We're now buying power outside the area, of course. But it's just really interesting to me, all these very early capabilities of the city of Rocky Mount to provide for the citizens electrical power, clean water, sewage, electric lights, and so forth. It's a neat progression of how a city grows. Okay, so while I was researching for tonight's show and kind of looking back at last week's show, a couple thoughts came to mind. Number one, Rocky Mount has some very, very old history, obviously. I mean, I've said last week you can trace there are buildings and reports of buildings and homes and so forth dating back literally to the 1700s. But the U.S. Department of the Interior, as part of the National Park Service, has this National Registry of Historic Places. There are branches all over the United States. North Carolina certainly has one as well. And so I ran across a downloadable version of the National Register of Historic Places for what was referred to as the Rocky Mount Central City Historic District. And this is about 108 or 109 pages of just historic buildings, many of which have been demolished, but it still tells their story to some degree. But it also gives a lot of information about these buildings. And so I went through, and I just wanted to see how far I could go back. So I started with 1890 and kind of worked my way forward. And I was really surprised at the number of buildings that I found that date back to the very early 1900s and even beyond that, to the late 1800s, that are still standing, by the way. And so having said that, we'll start with number one, which is number 14, Lee, in your list back there. 114 to 118 Southwest Main Street. That's on the Nash County side of Main Street. Taylor's department store occupied this space for a number of years, but it was built in 1890, and it says this building had a 114-122 address in the 1980 nomination. That's when it was nominated for inclusion into the National Historic Registry. It says the two-story brick commercial building probably constructed for T.J. Hackney and renovated about 1900. Mesker Brothers manufactured the pressed steel facade, which is the largest in the central business district. So this building is still standing. It dates to 1890, and there's been several buildings in it over the years, but by the time this was done, this historical registry, which was done, I believe, in 2009, but in any case, but at that time, Taylor's department store was in there. But like I said, this was the oldest one I found that's still, not an operating business, of course, but still a standing building, I guess what you want to say. 1890. Okay, let's move on to number 15. We talked in the past about this building. These were actually, this building's been around since 1892. It's on the corner of Gold Leaf Street and Atlantic Avenue. It's currently the home of Stretch Line Industry. But in 1892, it was built for the American Tobacco Company. This address on the building is actually now 200, but when it was included into this National Historic Registry, the address was listed as 222. But in any case, there's a plaque insert at the left, at the corner of the two-story prisory, reads K.W. Coghill, Contractor and Builder, 1892, which would make this building the oldest existing tobacco processing plant in Rocky Mount. The name changed to 1912 to the British American Tobacco Company, and in 1917 to the Export Leaf Tobacco Company. So this even predates the Imperial Tobacco Center over on Church Street, just a few blocks away from here, from this building. But 1892 is when this building was in operation, and it's still in use today. As I said, Stretch Line has it now, and it's been, they manufacture elastic for clothing over there, and have been for a number of years. Okay, let's move on to number 16. We've talked about this house in the past, and I didn't realize it is as old as it is. This is referred to as the Summerlin House. You see the address there is 416 South Church Street. And the article, the inclusion article said, the Summerlin House is the only surviving dwelling that was constructed during Rocky Mount's 1890s boom period on Church Street, and once an elite residential avenue lined with large homes of leading citizens. The original owner of this 1895 house is unknown, but Isaac W. Bass, a farmer, resided in the house from around 1908 through roughly 1915. Subsequent occupants included Atlantic Coastline Transfer Station employees and Alfred J. and Charles C. Walmsley in 1920. John Truitt owned the dwelling in the early 1930s and was the proprietor of the Truitt Boarding House. H. Oscar Summerlin, who operated the Summerlin Funeral Home, which stood next door at 422 South Church Street, purchased the property in 1940. The Summerlin family occupied the house through the late 1990s, when Preservation Rocky Mount purchased the dwelling in hopes of selling it with protective covenants. So this home is still standing. It's in pretty dire need of some repairs, frankly. I rode by it not too long ago as well. But it is still standing. And again, 1895, I didn't realize that this house was that old. Okay. One of the things that I found too is that there are up and down, in fact within a 2 or 3 block radius of Main Street, Rocky Mount, there's a boatload of old buildings that date back to the early 1900s, and further back than that in fact as well. But and a great many of them are still standing, and we've lost a bunch. Over the years we've lost a bunch of these old buildings. Some just were torn down to make room for expansion of other buildings. Others were frankly just literally falling down. Just a year or so ago, maybe 3 years ago now, if you recall, the old Penny's building on the corner of Western Boulevard and Main Street literally fell down in the road, fell down in its spot, and bricks all spilled out into Western Boulevard over there. But a lot of these old buildings are still standing. And at, let's see, number 17, Lee, Northwest Washington Street has a bunch of old buildings, and this is the 100 block of Northwest Washington Street, and you see the caption there. It says 118 on Washington Street. This building had a 116 118 Washington Street address and a 1980 nomination. One-story brick commercial building originally constructed as a market. The storefront has been boarded up since 1980. And then the second one at 120 Washington Street was built in 1920. The last one at 126 Washington Street was built in 1895. So 118 was built in 1895, 126 was built in 1895, and the 120 address was built in 1920. All three of these buildings, of course, are still standing. They're still there today. And you know, I realized something too when I was researching for the show tonight. That building on your right there, I think I may have stated in the past, erroneously as it turns out, and it was a memory thing. I just was confused temporarily. But I think I, at some point in a previous show, referred to that building on the right as the old Rocky Mount Police Station. It was not. The Rocky Mount Police Station was actually, I believe, the very next building to the just north of this. Is now since been torn down, of course. But I think I did recall mentioning this building as being the old Rocky Mount Police Station. But when I was doing the research, I realized today that that was not correct. And the police station itself has been torn down now. Okay. All righty, so let's move on then. Lee, let's go to number 18. I mentioned that there were some old buildings up and down Main Street on both sides, east and west Main, and within a couple block radius of Main Street as well. This is the 100 block, and I intentionally came back across the railroad tracks to the west side of town and took this shot, did a screen capture actually on my computer, looking across the railroad tracks because I wanted to get everything that was there. And if you look, what you're looking at there on the far right-hand side, of course, would be the old Planters Bank building, and then Harbor Street runs between that and the old Epstein's building. And then there are a number of buildings in between the Epstein building and all the way to the far left there. And so I did a research on all of them with the help of this historic registry that I found online. And we'll start with 109, which is the Epstein's building. That building was built in 1925. Adjacent to it at 113 Northeast Main that building was built in 1965, and I'm not sure that's not a misprint, to be honest with you. That's what it said, but I'm just not sure that building is older than 1965. I'm almost positive. I'm guessing that was maybe 1925 too, but that's what was in the historical registry listing, and I just copied and pasted what I saw there. 115 to 119 Northeast Main Street was built in 1900, and then 125 Northeast Main Street was built in 1907. Excuse me. Okay, the building you're looking at here now is actually at 118 Sunset Avenue. And we actually talked about this space on a prior show here a month or two ago. Carol's Dresser, I think, was in this space at one time. This space, this building, what I've got circled in yellow there, was actually built in 1900. And it was Rocky Mount's first Chamber of Commerce building where the Rocky Mount Record was published. And I didn't realize that Rocky Mount Record was published by the Chamber of Commerce. I've shared some articles and newspaper clippings and ads and so forth from the Rocky Mount Record, and I just assumed it was another newspaper operating in Rocky Mount, but in fact it was a publication of Rocky Mount's Chamber of Commerce, and they were located at 118 Sunset Avenue, which is this building right here you see in yellow. The building again was built in 1900. Okay, let's move on then. Number 20, right next door, this building was referred to as Cuthrell and Edwards Grocery in 1901 when it was built, the address being 114 Sunset Avenue. The caption says, two-story brick commercial building that originally housed the wholesale grocery firm of Cuthrell and Edwards. The facade was stuccoed and the storefront altered by 1980. So, you know, these old buildings obviously were built well. Many of them are still standing today and still being used. And there is an effort ongoing in downtown Rocky Mount to rehab some of these old buildings and put some life back into them, and I'm all in favor of that. I think that's wonderful. Rocky Mount has seen its share of bad times and troubled times and lean times, and a lot of businesses that hung on for decades in downtown Rocky Mount and finally just gave it up and folded up in a lot of business or moved out to one of the malls or somewhere else. But there's a lot of space down there, a lot of old buildings that could still be used. So we've got some potential to revitalize downtown Rocky Mount, and I would dearly love to see that happen. At my age, I'm not interested in going back in business myself, so I can't say that I will be opening a business anytime soon in downtown Rocky Mount. But if you're thinking of going to business and you're looking for a spot, I think it would be certainly worthwhile to consider. I'm not making a recommendation that you do that. I'm just saying consider, because there's a lot of good buildings downtown Rocky Mount that could be rehabbed. And if we can get enough of us to go back to downtown Rocky Mount and establish a business on there, maybe we can do something about bringing it back. Okay, Lee, let's move on then. Number 22. This actually kind of surprised me. I did not realize this little church was this old. This is the Christian Science Church at 213 South Church Street, and it was built in 1901. If you're not sure where you're looking at here, if you behind this and kind of off to the right, but there's the old Belt Tyler's Annex, the Belt Tyler's Automotive Center and so forth is back there behind this, that little alleyway that runs back there. So, and this is this, I think in the general area down there across from, is it First Baptist or First Methodist? I forget, I get the church, I think it's First Baptist Church. But anyway, 213 South Church Street. And this church, I don't think it was originally the Christian Science Church. I think it was another church originally, but in some time since it was built, in later years I should say, the Christian Science Church has acquired it. And I happened to be down that way a few months ago on a Sunday morning. I forgot where I was going, but I rode by, and there's a few folks in the parking lot, a few folks standing outside. So apparently there's still an operating congregation there, and they still get together. But a neat old church there dating back to 1901. And I see by the clock it's almost time for our next commercial break. So Lee, go ahead and bring it back to me if you would. We'll take this next break. When we come back, I've got some more of these old pictures to share with you. Like I said, this National Registry, Historic Registry, is about 110, 111 pages. It's not all pictures. There's a lot of text and a lot of writing and description and so forth. But it's chock-a-block full of old information about old Rocky Mount buildings and businesses and so forth. If you've got access to the internet, you'd like to find it, let me know. I'll be glad to give you I've got a link on my computer. I can send you an email link so you can click on it and go right straight to it. You can print it off if you wanted to. Like I said, it's a lot of pages, but it's just got a lot of neat information in it, and it really tells a neat story about the evolution of business and industry in Rocky Mount from the very early days, I should say, up into, well, when this thing put together, around 2009, I think was when it was actually published. They began submitting recommendations for businesses and buildings to be included in this historical registry as far back as 1980. But I think it took them a couple of decades, in fact, to compile all this together and then put it into a format they could share with the public. So, all right, let's go ahead and take that break, Lee. When we come back, we'll take a look at some more pictures and take your phone calls. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Way Back Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
There's a main nerve that leaves your back that goes into your hip and goes down your leg. It's called the sciatic nerve. A back injury can put pressure on that nerve, causing pain, numbness, tingling. Chiropractors can actually help that. At the Hammer Chiropractic Center on Sunset, we know exactly what to do. We have very good relationships with the doctors in Rocky Mount. We like to co-manage people's care. Some medications may help us do our jobs, and our jobs may help their medications work better.
And we're back. We're talking about old buildings, and I mean really old buildings. Some go back to the 1890s. I was really surprised to find the number of buildings that are over 100 years old. And what I'm sharing with you tonight is not all of them by any means. I just went through this historical registry and kind of picked the ones that I knew a little bit about or could find some information about. And there was information in the registry also, of course, about some of these buildings. So. But there are more. There are a lot more buildings in Rocky Mount that most of the old tobacco warehouses that are still standing anyway, most of those date back to the early 1900s. And so what we're sharing with you tonight is certainly not all inclusive. And it's just interesting to me that we have so many old buildings that are over 100 years old. Okay, let's jump back into it. Lead number 23. In 1901, this building was built at, the address would have been 108 Southwest Main Street. I've got it circled there in yellow. It says a two-story brick commercial building with unusual, complex, and delicate corbelling constructed for a standard hardware company. The storefront was altered by 1980. The second-story windows have been replaced since that time. If you remember some weeks or some months ago now, we talked about Mr. J.R. Sorsby. Mr. Sorsby ran his hardware store down here, and it was over the years a lot of different things. But interestingly enough, by the 1960s, Daniel's women's clothing was located here. Now, if you remember, just back in February, we talked about Mr. J.H. Daniel. He was a gentleman that got hit by the train and sadly killed in 1932. But his family carried on the business, and by the 1960s, this was one of the, I think, 3 or 4 different stores that were located in downtown Rocky Mount. But this building itself dates to 1901, originally being the home for the Standard Hardware building. Standard Hardware building. And it's a neat old building. If you get a chance to ride by some of these old buildings, look, I love the architecture of these old buildings, particularly the detail. And I'm learning all kinds of new words about this structure, the cornices and corbelling, and there's a bunch of neat old words that deal with this type of very intricate, very detailed decoration, if you will, particularly across the top of these old buildings. And this one is no exception. It's got a lot of this really, really fine craftsmanship. These buildings, they were not thrown up, to use a commonly used term in talking about construction. These buildings sometimes took a couple of years to get built. They were very well built, with excellent building materials. In many cases, the people who were having the buildings built were already very well off, very financially sound, and they could afford to put the very best materials into these buildings, and they could afford to hire the very best craftsmen to build these buildings, and they could afford, and in fact did, spare no expense in providing a very welcoming place for their customers. And so you put all that together and you get a building that not only looks great, it can stand the test of time. And so again, this building, 1901, is now 123 years old and still standing. Okay, let's move on then. Number 24. Here's one we all recognize, the Rocky Mount train station. This building was originally built in 1903. The address is, this is interesting, the address is actually 100 Coastline Street. Now we've talked before about Coastline Street, and it's kind of interesting that it's still listed as Coastline Street when actually Coastline Street was a little bit further north and kind of ran perpendicular to Main Street. But in any case, in this historical registry here, the train station had an address of 100 Coastline Street. I'm not even sure if this is still the current address. To be honest with you, I've not seen a recent address for the train station, so they may have dropped this address altogether, but that's what it was when this was put together. The train station had a 101 Hammersmith address in the 1980 nomination. 3-story brick Romanesque-style railroad station constructed in 1903 at a cost of $13,344.77. The building initially had a 2-story central section flanked by a 1-story wing, flanked by 1-story wings, one on each side. A second story was added to each wing in 1911 and 1912, and a third story in 1916. Originally the Atlantic Coastline Station, the building later served the Seaboard Coastline. The building was rehabilitated from 1997 to 2000 and continues to serve as Rocky Mount's train station. So just to recap, this building originally had a 2-story center section with a single-story wing on either side. In 1911, 1912, they actually increased the floor on either side to be equal with the center part, and so it was all a 2-story all the way across. And then in 1916, a third floor was added all the way across. So it went from a 1-story to a 2-story to a 3-story over a span of 12, 13 years anyway. But the original building, built in 1903. Okay, let's move on then. Number 25, this area of Rocky Mount we still refer to as 5 Points, and with good reason. If you're familiar with the area, you've got Tarboro Street and Washington Street and Rose Street, all coming together right here. And of course, right there in the center is what we refer to today as the old May and Gordon drugstore building. And in 1904, however, when it was originally built, it was referred to as 5 Points Drugstore. The address is technically 132 Tarboro Street, but it says DJ. And by the way, one of the things that I ran across repeatedly about these old buildings was the people who built them. And in many cases, it was none other than DJ Rose. If you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about how much of a prolific builder DJ Rose was over the years. And that company is still in business today after like 130 or 40 years in operation. It's still in business and still building. But a whole lot of the buildings in downtown Rocky Mount were built in that 1890 to 1915, 1920 time frame by DJ Rose. So it says DJ Rose constructed this 2-story brick commercial building for Reading D. Bullock and John D. Bullock in 1904 and enlarged it in 1906 in the same style. The building was originally known as 5 Points Drugstore due to its location at the intersection of Tarboro, Washington, and Rose Streets. Architects, doctors, dentists, and other professionals rented second-floor office space in the Bullock building. In 1980, This building retained an intact interior and was considered one of Eastern North Carolina's best examples of a turn-of-the-century drugstore. So, you know, over the years, this building there's been a couple different attempts to do something with the building. I've known a couple different businesses that operate on the second floor. It's great that it's still there. It's great that it's still standing. I've heard rumors recently that there was an effort underway to do something with the building. I'm not sure if that's true or accurate, but I have heard that, and I sincerely hope it is true, because it's a shame. The building is still, I think, structurally sound. I think it's still in fairly good shape to be 120 years old. So maybe someone will get in there and get something with the business, the building, and get us another operating business in downtown Rocky Mount. Hope so anyway. Okay, lead number 26. 1905, this building was first constructed. The address 227 to 235. Those two trees actually cover up the left and right side of this building, but it literally spans the length of the picture here. And so the building had a 227-231 Southeast Main Street address in the 1980 nomination. Two-story brick commercial building constructed for Matthews, Weeks and Company by D.J. Rose in 1905 and remodeled in the 1920s. All four storefronts had been altered. A wood-shingled pent roof hoods constructed above the two northern storefronts, and the second-story windows on the two southern storefronts enclosed by 1980. And so, as you can see, this was at one time was a location for Ward's Appliance Service. There's been a few other businesses in there over the years. I'm not sure what's occupying these spaces now, if anything. Frankly, there's abundance of empty spaces downtown Rocky Mount, sad to say. So I'm not sure there's anything in any of these spaces now, but the building still stands. Okay, let us move on. Number 27. This one really surprised me here. If I'd seen this before, I'd forgotten it. This building, built in 1905 at 110 to 118 Marigold Street. Listen to this. This one-story brick commercial building originally constructed as the Pepsi-Cola bottling company. Storefronts had been altered and open corner bay enclosed with concrete block since 1980. Now, we talked about the Pepsi-Cola bottling plant being around the corner on Washington Street. They're on the corner of Washington Hill Street for a while. They were right across the street for a while. They were even down on Falls Road for a while. But I do not recall reading or hearing that the Pepsi-Cola bottling plant was ever in this building. But according to this historic registry, and I should also point out that there was an awful lot of research put into this registry by a lot of different people, and they use a lot of different resources. At the end of it, there's for lack of a better term, we'll say a bibliography where they went through and listed all their sources. But having said that, there's still the possibility there could be an error in construction dates and previous addresses, because addresses did change from time to time. So it's entirely possible that there are some errors in this thing. So I would not bet my life that everything in this historic registry is 100% accurate. But they did put a lot of effort into trying to be accurate, and that's obvious with the number of references they give at the end of it and resources they use to try to arrive at this information that's included in here. And everything you see at the bottom here, I've taken directly from this historic registry. I just literally copied and pasted it from the historical registry into a little section I added at the bottom of the picture so I could share it with you. But anyway, 1905, 110 to 118 Marigold Street, and originally built for the Pepsi-Cola bottling company. How about that? Okay, let's move on to lead number 28. 1905 also, this building at 119 to 123 Washington Street. 123 is the tan building there in the center, and 119 is just to the right. And again, this is North Washington Street. It's a little north of the building we looked at a while ago, the May and Gorham Drugstore building. It says 119 Washington Street, two-story brick commercial building with corbelled cornices above the first and second stories, and buff-colored brick quoins, pilasters, and a band of 6 lozenges across the parapet. I had to do some Google research to find out what all this meant. Let me get this phone call. We'll talk about it some more. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
All right. That last picture that you just showed about that 110, 118 Marigold Street.
Right.
that suburban-looking automobile that was sitting there was sitting on the spot in the corner there in that picture where Chuck Braswell's granddaddy started the Rocky Mountain Radiator Shop. The building's long been gone.
Right.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you. All right. Yep. Okay. So anyway, I mentioned earlier about the detail and craftsmanship on some of these buildings, and particularly the ornate decorations on the outside, around the top, above the doors and windows and so forth. And I literally had to go do Google searches on 3 or 4 of these things, and I'm not going to try to remember everything that I saw. But each one of these little decorations or craftsmanship that you see on these buildings has a name. And so it was interesting to me to learn that they do have a name for all these different types of decorations on these buildings. And it's neat that 100 years ago, there was so much attention paid to putting this kind of detail on a building that, looking back, I got to ask, why do they feel the need to do that? And I think it boils down to, as I said, a lot of people who built these buildings had the money, they had the financial resources to not only pay for the better materials, but pay for better craftsmen. And it was just a way of saying, hey, this is my building, I'm proud of it, and I'm putting a little more effort, a little more money into making it look great for the customers. Let's move on to lead number 29. 124 to 128 Tarboro Street. Again, getting back Mr. J.H. Daniel, the man who got hit by the train in 1932, operated at 124 Tarboro Street in the early 1912, 1915 time frame. This building was built in 1905, and the one just to the right of it, at the same time frame, built in 1905. One to the right was originally built as a furniture store, G.S. Tucker and Company. How about that? Tucker Furniture was originally in there. Let's move on to lead number 30. The Belt Tower building was built in 1905. There you go. 3-story commercial building sheathed in enameled metal panels. This building has gone through so many renditions over the years. It's really amazing that it's changed as much as it has. Doesn't look anything like the older pictures I've seen dating back to the 1950s and 40s and so forth. One more lead we'll call tonight. Number 31, Rosenblum Levy. The circle in there in yellow you see there, this building was built in 1905. Was constructed by J.D. Blunt, constructed for J.D. Blunt, Gray Williams, and P.L. Thigpen as a dry goods store in 1905. So again, another building that's over 100 years old, still standing, still could be used for something else. And I've got a few more, but we've run slam out of time. I'm going to save these. I will share these last 3 or 4 with you next week's show. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to them tonight. I want to thank those who called in tonight and shared your memories and your thoughts about these old buildings. It does my heart good to see the interest in these old buildings. And I'm sincerely hoping that there'll be some initiative put forth to rehab some of these buildings and bring them back so that they can be used again. And maybe that'll happen. We'll have to see. All right, Lee, bring it back to me. Folks, that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you again for those that called in and shared your memories with us. I appreciate you. Have a great week. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you next week with more Wayback Wednesday. Good night.
Your one-stop shop for all your gardening and landscaping needs. All you need is your imagination, and Harper's Garden and Stone Center can supply the materials to make the job the success you want it to be. We have flowers, plants, trees, decorative stones, slate or flagstone. Enjoy the nice spring weather with Paulie's Island Furniture and our Wilmington Grills. Also visit Wendy's Hole in the Wall Boutique and shop for the whole family. Shoes, Vera Bradley bags, and Simply Southern apparel. Harper's Garden and Stone Center, located at 2145 Oak Level Road, open Monday through Saturday, rain or shine.